On March 11th, 2020, a pandemic was declared by the powers that be, and our world changed forever. That's not debatable. But why did it happen? How did it happen? And what power structures were in place that created sheep of populations around the world that were just sort of glad to be herded into pens, so to speak, locked down and went along with it? Friendships destroyed, families destroyed. So that's at the heart of this question, and our next guest aims to answer that in her brand new book called 311, Viral Takeover. Here is the book cover. Investigative journalist Sonia Elijah is our guest. Her new book is a deep forensic investigation into the COVID era, drawing on years of FOIA requests, leaked documents, timelines, interviews, all to examine some of the biggest unanswered questions of that period. And Sonia has been a frequent guest on our show over the years. She's broken many stories wide open. Her investigative journalism, I will say, is meticulous, is second to none. And so we're thrilled to have her on the show today to do a deep dive on this subject. And Sonia, I have to say, just the book, I mean, as you and I are speaking, we're recording this, it's hard to believe, 6 years after they declared this pandemic. I think your book is really going to be like the ultimate deep dive on this subject, the ultimate examination. I mean, students maybe 20, 30 years, 100 years from now will read your book as the standard to try to understand and make sense of this. So welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Thank you so much, Clayton. Thank you for having me back on.
My pleasure. And I just should say at the outset, because you know, they have gone after you big time. I just want to show, like, I want our audience, let's see if we can make this like a #1 bestseller, by the way, and just pick it up, buy a copy of it, donate it to your local, library after you read it, but just pick up a copy. I think that this is an incredibly important book for the future of humanity. So incredible work on this. And I know that this took you many years to write, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's close to probably 5 years of my investigative reporting, particularly the last 3.5 years, I would say. And I strove for it to be like a meticulously documented and evidence-based expose to uncover the profound deceptions at the heart of the official COVID narrative and the response to it. So, I didn't want it to be based on speculation. So we've got interviews with experts, freedom of information responses, official public documents, and scientific literature as well, everything to back it up. So that was really important to me, Clayton.
So the book is called 311, which is March 11th. Why is March 11th, 2020? So important in your view, like that date, so much so that it made it onto the front book jacket of your book?
Yeah. So what we saw that day, and it was exactly 6 years ago today, was more than just a health response, Clayton. It was a global reset. And so just how we saw for 9/11, so I see 3/11 being a biological sequel to 9/11. And history shows us, Clayton, that usually we see these sort of global resets in society precipitated by disruptive events. So just how we have, attacks on 9/11, we had that birthed the Patriot Act, the 2001 anthrax letter attacks, and we know what happened from that. So 9/11 led to citizen surveillance, state surveillance of citizens, whereas 3/11 led to citizen compliance with the state. We saw mass compliance. We saw literally the whole world almost go into lockdown, surrender their sort of civil liberties, and on the words of so few, and unaccountable bodies. The world has never been the same since. So I sort of mark that day as like sort of that turning point going into a new era.
And you argue really that COVID marked a shift from like this post 9/11 Patriot Act surveillance state into this new era of direct citizen compliance. Like so many
Yes.
people were totally compliant with it. Just having conversations the other day with an individual who was telling me about like going to an event at his family for like some kind of, I don't know, holiday or whatever it was. And when he was going to this family member's house, they were like, "Oh, well, you didn't get the COVID shot. So we really think that we're going to have to separate. We keep you in a separate room. We'll have to," and it was really made him like shaming him in a way, like, haven't you seen
Yeah.
the news? You should have gotten the shot. Now you're putting my entire family at risk here. So what do you think changed in practical terms for just ordinary people who seem to like lose their minds?
It's quite simple. They absolutely weaponized fear, Clayton. They used fear as a vehicle to justify, yeah, these locking down, the way they treated the unvaccinated as sort of second-class citizens, if you remember. And so when someone is so afraid, it sort of arrests your critical thinking. When you're petrified, when you're so scared, and you believe that when you go out, you're going to die from this virus. And my book, particularly this is in chapter 3, I talk about how the British government totally weaponized fear. We had messaging campaigns, hundreds of millions of UK taxpayers' money spent on messaging campaigns where it was like, if you go out, you're going to kill grandma. If you go out, you'll die. And people were petrified. People died in their homes. This is such a crime, and it really hasn't been documented enough. And it's just so horrific. So people were just afraid, and
And there was a
and
disconnect
they
too,
complied.
and there was a big disconnect too, right? You had the revelations of like Boris Johnson at parties, and so they were weaponizing this fear
Yes,
on the British. I
yes,
mean, just we
yes,
focus on Britain for a second here. So the streets were empty, people were locked,
yes,
staying at home, and Boris Johnson was out at parties. So
yeah.
they
So
knew they
yeah,
knew about the. Did they know about this weaponization?
the hypocrisy. So I mean, I write about these lockdown parties. You've got Boris Johnson. You've got also in New York City senior public health officials having drug-fueled sex parties going on in New York City. So I mean, they knew absolutely that it was not harmful. Like it wasn't, because we knew early on that the infection fatality rate was 0.1% for those under 70, which is comparable to like a severe flu season. So that was known very early on. And exactly the hypocrisy. They're telling people you can't say goodbye to your loved one who's dying in a care home. I mean, the way they treated the elderly in care homes was just the greatest crime there. And yet they were having parties and wine and cheese parties and soirees at Downing Street. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really told this story on the show, but my father was had a stroke and then taken to the hospital, never came home after that. And in Pennsylvania, one of the worst states in the country for this, and we were not allowed to see him. We were not allowed to go into the hospital at all. And he, just died alone in the hospital because of COVID and because we couldn't go see him, even though he wasn't there with COVID. It had nothing to do with COVID. He was just there. He's 86 years old and had a stroke and was taken there. And once he got into the hospital, basically that exacerbated his death. But they wouldn't let us see him. And they told my mom that she could come up to the window outside the hospital, like if she could get high enough, like in the shrubs, to like look in the window. And he was out of it at that point. Like he was going to be able to like look out the window and see her. He would have thought he was being attacked or something. He wouldn't know what was really going on. So just awful what they did to people, what they did to us, what they've done to everyone.
It's horrific, horrific story. I mean, we also had in care homes, Clayton, we had these end of life, the just in case protocols. Many elderly were just basically dispatched with given midazolam, basically like these sort of opiates to slow down their breathing, and they died. So a lot of the excess deaths that were seen early on in 2020 was because of those protocols, Clayton.
Did you know the biggest threat to your smile is something silently happening to your gums? More than 78% of people worldwide experience gum recession that actually develops slowly over time. In the United States, nearly 50% of adults over 30 already show signs of gum disease. And by the age of 65, that number actually reaches 60%. It's pretty shocking. Gum loss is not just cosmetic, it's actually exposing tooth roots. Increasing sensitivity can lead to decay and even tooth loss. The problem is that standard toothpaste actually don't rebuild gum tissue at all, and they actually may mask the symptoms, never addressing the root cause, and consist of fluoride and all sorts of harsh additives inside of it. Have you seen those charcoal toothpastes? Terrible. Smile changes everything. It's the first ever fluoride-free peptide toothpaste designed to assist in the reversal of gum loss to the source. Peptides like BPC-157 and GHK-Cu support natural tissue repair, and nanohydroxyapatite strengthen and remineralize his teeth. They whiten without peroxides, while soothing botanicals and blue spirulina and aloe vera reclaim those sensitive gums. The result is stronger gums, healthier teeth, and a much brighter smile. So get 10% off plus free shipping. Head to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted. And how difficult was it for you to get access to that information? For instance, if we just take like Pennsylvania, for instance, so do we, as they labeled individuals having died with COVID, right? Of COVID or with COVID? Yeah. And then what sort of like drug protocols were they given? A friend of our family has called this a culling, C-U-L-L-I-N-G, a culling of the population. Do you see it that way?
I mean, I can't ever speak to intent because I can't get into people's minds. But from the evidence, from what we're seeing, I mean, I don't know how you explain away these protocols that were put in place in care homes and the way they treated the elderly. I mean, it just, you can't quite comprehend that. It's deeply disturbing.
So when you started this book, I'm sure you had an outline. You had an idea of where you were going to go, right? The best laid plans. At what point did you just scrap that outline and just say, oh my gosh, I've discovered this and I have to go down this rabbit hole? How many different corridors were you traveling down?
So what really helped me is the book begins with an Appendix A, and it's a timeline. It's a critical time of all the key events. And that took me actually months to compile this timeline. But really the book follows the sort of the timeline, because the way I see it, when, dates don't lie. When I look, for example, you have January 10th was when they, in China, when the virus, the sequence to the virus was uploaded to virological.org. And then you have 3 days later, January 13th, you've got Moderna with the NIH, the National Institute of Health's Vaccine Research Center, deciding on the vaccine sequence for Spikevax. So just 3 days later, you have, on that same day, on January 13th, again, 3 days from January 10th, you have Professor Christian Drosten and his PCR test protocol being approved by the World Health Organization. And as you know, Clayton, the PCR test was the primary gold standard test used for locking down the world, practically. It was all on these PCR tests. And these PCR tests were never designed. Dr. Kary Mullis designed this PCR test back in the day. And we have him on record saying this test should never be used for diagnosis, to diagnose a disease. Yet you have this unvalidated test, severely flawed, and somehow peer-reviewed magically within 24 hours. It gets approved by the World Health Organization. And this is what is used, this test, to justify locking down the world. And it's notoriously flawed because if it's a high cycle threshold, your chances of it being a false positive dramatically increases. So we have all these false positives. So people thinking they have COVID when they don't, and they're forced to quarantine, to lock down. I mean, and it just perpetuated lockdowns. My book also, I examine the innovolateral test, which is the rapid antigen test. It was by a California startup, and this startup, Innova Medical Group, was founded in March 2020. What a coincidence! It's founded at that time. Now this is the test that NHS spent £4 billion, £4 billion of taxpayers' money on this test, Chinese-made lateral rapid antigen test, that was basically, the FDA then said this test is rubbish and should be thrown in the trash. But the UK government kept putting in all the NHS test and trace kits, which were given out like candy, free for everyone. And it was completely, these tests were bogus. They were like completely flawed, and they were not fit for purpose.
When you mentioned some of the dates and how convenient that is, that 3 days later we have this, 5 days later. Were there things that shocked you about this timeline? For instance, we hear stories about, obviously, that the pandemic planning that was happening beforehand. We see in the Epstein emails, obviously, Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein, discussions about a pandemic. So when you're mapping out this timeline, we're like, okay, here's point A, what we think of point A.
Yeah.
But wait a second, there's something that predates point A. How did that happen?
Yeah. So if you go back to 2019, I mean, you have these pandemic exercises that were taking place. So from January 2019 to August 2019, you had Crimson Contagion, and that was led by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Cadleck. And he's actually I've written a lot about him in this book. So that was a pandemic exercise, which happened to basically be a group of US tourists go to China, they contract some kind of respiratory novel influenza, they come back and they spread it to the US.
Convenient.
So you have that going on. Yeah, very convenient. But what you have actually is that you've got then a few weeks after that exercise concludes. So that goes through to August, but then you have in October 2019, you have Event 201. Now, Event 201 was hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center. In conjunction, it partnered with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I found that was very, very telling what came out of that, because they basically, all these leading officials, they're doing these pandemic exercises. Again, it's on a novel coronavirus. But what comes out of that is that something has to be done with misinformation, okay? That governments and private entities need to work together and come up with nimble approaches to combat misinformation. And what did we see, right? Post 3/11, Clayton, we saw an unprecedented use of censorship, all in the name of combating disinformation. And of course, it's these elites that get to decide how they define what disinformation is. And a lot of the book, especially towards the end, I go in a lot of detail about this machinery of censorship. I talk a lot about the Trusted News Initiative, which is essentially a network that crosses big tech, big media, and the governments. They all come together and they decide on that they're gonna shut down any sort of scientific discourse, debate, and it's only one narrative, one official narrative is allowed.
Where was that narrative coming from? Was it we saw the coordination through Facebook and Twitter. We know that the Biden administration had backdoor access to Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. Where was it coordinated? Were able to pinpoint it down?
The World Health Organization. So it's what the World Health Organization deemed as scientific. So, for example, anything to do with sort of even the lab leak theory, that was quickly shut down. You had them going after, anybody talking about that. And then anything to do with sort of early vaccine harms,
Right.
anything to do with early COVID-19 treatments. Don't you remember
Hmm.
how they treated people who advocated ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine? These were proven early treatments for COVID. Those doctors who advocated those treatments were demonized. They had their licenses, the medical licenses, taken away from them. Some were even driven to suicide. I mean, it's just the book. I mean, I'm going to lift it up here, but this book, it cuts across. I really wanted to have a really good overview of everything, and I didn't want to leave anything important out. I didn't go through any sort of rabbit holes or any sort of like what they would conspiracy. Everything was backed up by evidence. And I really wanted to stay true to that. But you see, yeah,
Well, I was
so
going to
many
say,
crimes.
I was going to say on the WHO piece. I know, from our show on Redacted on YouTube, in the early days of the pandemic, as we were reporting these adverse events or women that were having all sorts of menstrual issues, we were highlighting Facebook groups where women were getting together saying their periods are disappearing because they got the shot and all the. We were reporting that, and then we were banned. YouTube banned us, and of course, the reason for the banning was WHO misinformation. We need to adhere to WHO standards. And even under our videos, they would put that big disclaimer that said World Health
Yeah.
Organization, and it gives a whole list of like COVID data. If someone was watching our video, they felt the need to put this like disclaimer about what the World Health Organization actually says under videos. Like it was a massively coordinated big tech, and all these big tech people were compliant. We saw that with Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
We saw that with Google, YouTube, Facebook. I mean, everybody.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, a lot of my early videos and me interviewing other experts, they were all taken down. I mean, I interviewed Dr. Robert Malone very early on. In June 2021 was my first interview with Malone, and that literally the same day that got taken down. So, I mean, you're really the also wanted to highlight the way the vaccine injured were treated, Clayton. Let's not forget that.
Great
You had
point.
Facebook pages, Facebook page. I interviewed Maddie de Garay's mother, Stephanie. Maddie de Garay was a 12-year-old that was in the Pfizer's adolescent clinical trial. She was left with life-altering injuries. She had a feeding tube, she couldn't walk. I mean, the book goes into so many things. I obviously dissect all the Pfizer documents and trial documents, but the way she was treated, so she had Facebook accounts that were shut down. This is a girl that was vaccine injured. You had vaccine injured groups. They used to use, for example, they would to try and get around censors. They would use carrot emojis instead of saying like the vaccine. They would do a carrot emoji. And what you have the BBC, and we know BBC they helm the Trusted News Initiative. It's led by the BBC. They would flag these Facebook accounts of the vaccine injured and flag it to big tech for them to be brought down. And you have the BBC bragging about that. I mean, that article's actually is in my book. I mean, there's a lot of exhibits in my book. There's a lot of screenshots. There's a lot of images. There's like 124 images. There's 941 citations. There you have legacy media working with big tech to bring down, to basically censor and silence the vaccine injured.
Really doing that at like the heart of journalism, like protecting the people against tyranny and big government. And here they're doing the bidding of the government against the people. It's remarkable. When you looked at these FOIA requests after 5 years of FOIA requests and leaks and interviews and going through Pfizer documents, was there like single most shocking piece of evidence you came across that made you think, wow, this is even bigger than I first thought it was before I started writing this book?
Yeah, actually, it was towards the end. I mean, obviously, I've been I mean, been brought to tears with a lot of things that I've discovered with vaccine harms, going through a lot of these periodic safety update reports, which were submitted by Pfizer and BioNTech to the European Medicine Agency. And all the harms. I mean, it was just, especially even to newborns, to pregnant women, crossing the placenta, going to the fetus, and really horrific harms, all documented, all known, and yet still approved, still greenlit. You have harms known before emergency use authorization was given. There's a chapter that talks about this FDA's presentation slide in October 2020. This is a few months before EUA was granted. And there was on this slide, and there's a screenshot of it in my book, it's a whole list of harms that they were on the lookout for, that they, were associated with these novel mRNA-based injections, yet they still greenlit it. And but more recently, Clayton, I would say towards the end of 2025, I did a Freedom of Information Act request to the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, DSIT, and I asked them if they had any. I wanted all documents, minutes of meetings, anything related to NATO's direct influence on the UK's COVID-19 vaccine disinformation policy. And they admitted they have it. So now we have on record that NATO was involved, directed the UK's vaccine disinformation policy. They refused to give it to me because of national security and the risks of it being misinterpreted.
I guess we're too stupid to read it for ourselves and interpret it for ourselves. Yeah. So it's just embarrassment. They're worried about being embarrassed because they were directing the news agencies and others to squash the truth.
So we have NATO involved. This is military involvement. We know that the 77th Brigade, which is sort of this British army unit, was covertly, had UK citizens under surveillance. They employed the military to survey citizens. You've got also, I mean, it just goes on and on. And it's just so shocking. It really is. And you have like at least five secretive Whitehall units, one being the CDU, countering disinformation unit. And people were being tracked, what posts they were having on Twitter or X at the time. And you have scientists and doctors being, under surveillance. So it really is just very disturbing.
One of the big fights over the last few years has been the virus origins. In your reporting, what role did those early pillar papers play in locking in this natural origin narrative before the debate had even been settled?
Yeah, so my first two chapters really look into sort of the locking in the narrative, is what I call it. And you have these three pillar papers published in eminent journals, and they sort of, it's all about dispelling any sort of lab leak theory or anything that came from a lab. I went into deep dive mode in dissecting the emails that were released by Freedom of Information Act, all the Fauci emails. So Anthony Fauci's emails with Sir Jeremy Farrar, who led the Wellcome Trust at the time. All their emails with all the scientists that were sort of key authors of these papers. And the first paper, which is in the Lancet, this is the joint statement that went out early on. We know that 26 out of the 27 signatories of that statement had ties to the Wuhan Institute of Virology and its funders.
So a lot of conflicts of interest right there. I mean,
exactly.
How important, these conflicts of interest, in shaping what the world was told to believe. So they were not impartial at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got, what is, for example, you had also at that time, you had a paper coming out of India, Pradham et al. Paper. And that was really explosive because these researchers, these scientists, they discovered 4 HIV-like inserts in the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. And they were like, this is really weird. This is what that paper got shut down. The authors were forced to withdraw it 3 days later after it was published. And when I look through all these emails, like you've got Anthony Fauci talking about it. Oh, that's such an outlandish, what a crazy paper. They're all discussing it amongst themselves. But what these emails reveal was a coordinated, they all acted in one accord. They were very unified on shutting down the lab leak theory. There was not, it was all about the natural origin of the virus, the zoonotic tale that they told the world. They all locked down very early on to agree on that. And even though privately they believed it was man-made. Privately, this is what they discussed, but in public, this is what they told everyone.
We've been, I think, desensitized to this idea of the lab leak. We've heard it thousands of times. Was there one particular piece of evidence that stood out to you that the public was discouraged from examining seriously this idea of the lab leak, that we were like, don't be, you're racist if you believe that, right? Or there was some other piece of evidence that we were strongly discouraged from examining seriously?
I mean, it just was really obvious. It was shut down. You were branded as a conspiracy theorist if you were to talk about that. And obviously, we know that a lot of these scientists who were saying, they were bringing up the science, like this is a possibility. They were deplatformed. The algorithm worked against them. They were shadow banned. It was just, you couldn't discuss it. I mean, but Chapter 2 of my book obviously talks about the cracks in the narrative, which I talk about this Indian paper. But that's not only that, there was a 19 nucleotide sequence, and this is to do with Moderna's fingerprint in the virus, that somehow was a reverse match of an early patent from Moderna. So this was really odd, right? We know that this did get picked up by, I think, Fox News. One of their anchors interviewed the CEO of Moderna at the time, and he sort of dismissed it. I think some UK papers wrote about that, but that could have quietened down quite quickly. There were just a lot of anomalies that were going, tied to this, the genetic sequence of the virus.
Do you think there was to me, it seemed like a tipping point moment, at least in YouTube and big tech, when Jon Stewart went on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and Stephen Colbert was challenging him because Jon Stewart said this was clearly came from a lab, and made fun of it, clearly came from a lab. And Stephen Colbert was pushing, really sort of carrying the pail of water for this deep state that was trying to paint a certain story. And Jon Stewart just was having none of it and said, come on, this is ridiculous, and laid it all out. And I saw, I think, a switch right then, at least on YouTube. Suddenly, we were allowed to talk about the lab leak. We were allowed to say that, yeah, that's what we all believe. And now Jon Stewart kind of gave us a pass, and YouTube sort of had to acknowledge it. And even the mainstream media had to start acknowledging it.
Yeah. Yeah. It sort of became, yeah. I think it's just because they couldn't sweep it under the rug anymore. You have so many people speaking out about it. So I think it just became too troublesome for them to try and kind of, dampen down. But yeah.
We've also been, you've done an incredible job of sort of tracking this large network, Eco Health Alliance, the Eco Health Alliance Wuhan network. Yeah. So for people who haven't followed that part of the story closely, I guess the diffuse network, right, is what it's called, or in this important document. Can you walk us through why that is so important?
Yeah. So basically there was, in 2018, this is what you're referring to is the diffuse proposal which is Eco Health Alliances. So this is run by Peter Daszak at the time. And we know Eco Health Alliance was at the heart of all of this, right? They worked in tandem with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. They got grants from the NIH, hundreds of millions of dollars in grants, and doing gain of function research, right? When there was a moratorium on that kind of research, it was forbidden. So they did it in China. And so the diffuse proposal was in 2018, it was done. And it was basically EcoHealth Alliance's submission for a grant, partnering with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, submitted to DARPA, okay, to the DoD. And they were asking for $14 million to do research where they were going to insert the furin cleavage site into coronaviruses. And the DoD at the time turned them down because they deemed it too risky. So this paper got leaked out. I interviewed Charles Rixey, who is a former Marine and an expert in this, and that proposal was leaked to him. And he then put it on the group called Drastic, the Drastic's website. And this is around the fall of 2021, September 2021, when that came out. So we have it there, like evidence that the US government didn't, we have EcoHealth Alliance asking for money to do exactly this kind of risky research, gain of function, and it got turned down. But yet somehow they managed to get funding through, Anthony Fauci's NIAID to continue doing this work in China. And I have emails, looking again in the book, there are emails where Fauci's asking exactly what from his colleagues, give me a list of what are all these projects that we have funded, that EcoHealth Alliance has done, and it's listed. So he knew exactly what was going on. So when you see him testifying to Congress, gain of research, this type of research has never been done, is just, that's not true.
There are a lot of key, and I know that Senator Rand Paul has been trying to prosecute Fauci, trying to go after him, saying that he is a criminal, that he should be locked up. There were key private calls, emails between Fauci, Farrar, Anderson, yes, all early on. Yeah. So in your view, what do you think these communications reveal about how, like, the scientific and maybe the public messaging was all coordinated?
Yeah. So you have the February 1st teleconference taking place in 2020. And you have, again, all these key officials were on that call. And I looked at emails sort of leading up to that call and afterwards. And there was a real sort of sense of backslapping afterwards and relief. Like, I'm so glad we're all on the same page and we're all going to, basically, we're only going to put forward one narrative, which is the zoonotic, like it's just come from animals and it's jumped from one species to another. And we're going to shut down this lab origin theory hypothesis. And that, like I said, that was done very early on. And they're protecting themselves because many of these scientists are linked with gain of function research. So of course they want to protect the field that they're working in because they're relying it for, that's their source of funding.
Right. Yeah, they were telling us they weren't involved in this at all. They were lying before Congress. It's so despicable. I want to talk about the lockdowns because, from your scientific background, I mean, I don't know that we have, maybe we do, but I don't know that we have the full accounting and data yet to know just how detrimental these lockdowns were. Because it's like, where do you start? With the children? Do you start with mental health? Do you start with the economy, businesses shut down? When you were tackling the lockdowns, how did you try to wrap your arms around that?
Yeah, I mean, I tackled it from different places, but also I looked at the testimonies given um, during the COVID-19 inquiries. We had one in England, we had one done in Scotland, and I wanted to get these scientists that were such strong proponents for these lockdowns,
Like Neil
and I
Ferguson?
want yeah, like Susan Mitchie, obviously Neil Ferguson. We know his paper. So Neil Ferguson's this is Report 9. This is infamous Report 9. This was the paper that literally the whole world locked down on, and it was notoriously flawed. His lockdown paper on how if these countries did not lock down to mitigate COVID-19, then like so many, like 500 million, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's like 500 million deaths would occur. Like, so, it just within 3 months. And that never turned out to be the case. And that paper was severely flawed. And anyone speaking against that paper, again, was just sort of sidelined. But I looked at what those scientists on oath were saying, and I dissected their transcripts. And that was I quite enjoyed doing that actually. And because you're saying this on one side, this is what, and this, and we know the truth is telling us, what's going on. But to do with the actual harms, we will never know, Clayton. It will take decades for the true tally to really of all the harms, because we have a whole generation of children who lost out in education, in development, social, emotional, academic. It's we will never know the full extent. We will never know. But we know that more harms were caused, 100% more, so many more harms were caused by the lockdowns than by the actual virus.
It's so deeply disturbing. And just seeing like the little kids who were, in kindergarten or not even kindergarten, and were forced to do like online classes, like, and they're sitting there bouncing around on a camera, like on a Zoom call. Like, come on.
And you had them also. So I interviewed a child psychologist. So my interview with her is also in the book. And she was sort of at the, ground zero, essentially. She's a child psychologist. She's seeing children, and they're all, and she was saying they're so traumatized. And also their parents, they're so scared, the parents. I mean, almost you have the anxiety, she actually gave me an example, a specific parent that made their children like strip down, like come home from school, strip down, put everything in the wash, jump in the shower. This is to sort of wash the, whatever microbes away. You had syndromes like COVID anxiety syndrome being diagnosed, being termed. And it's official diagnosis,
Wow.
right?
Well, just kids being terrified of it.
Yeah, constant hand washing,
Oh,
sort of obsessive compulsive of like, if I go out, I'll get a virus and I'll die. And
oh.
again, I mean, we were the populations were brainwashed. I mean, again, going back to the public messaging, government public messaging at the time was all about using fear and coercing compliance.
Just horrible.
I looked at in the book as well. There are these government documents, meetings that occurred. This is with SAGE. SAGE is the UK government sort of scientific advisors, and they were actually they're screenshots of these documents where they actually clearly say we're going to use fear to getting people to comply. We need to up the fear. So, yeah, it's just yeah.
I mean, and
Psychological operations is what, it is. It's psyops.
I mean, it's yeah, to lead children down this path, to terrify them. It's, like lifelong trauma. They'll perhaps never recover from it. I guess let's turn to the Great Barrington Declaration. This
Yeah.
became like really a lightning rod. Why do you think that the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration were treated so aggressively? And And what did that tell you about how dissent was being managed, and voices were being silenced and
Yeah.
people were being shut down? What is the Great
Yeah.
Barrington Declaration?
So the Great Barrington Declaration, we have the co-authors of that. So basically, it was Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, and Dr. Sunitra Gupta, and they met at Great Barrington, a town called Great Barrington in the US, and I. And essentially, they agreed, these sort of key scientists, that they wanted to basically say, like, lockdowns is a really horrible idea. We should just focus about protecting the elderly. But anybody healthy, young, should just go about their business because they believed in herd immunity,
Right.
right? Which is a complete scientific. Um, and they so they were the first, obviously, they came up with it. They were the co-authors of it, and they got other medical professionals and scientists to sign this document and agreement. And I think millions of people signed it. And these three scientists were really demonized very early on. And we have an email, again, in my book, I've got this email from Francis Collins, who was leading the NIH at the time, saying, what are we going to do about these three fringe epidemiologists? And,
Fringe.
basically like these fringe epidemiologists, and we had, I know, Mike, for example, Martin Kulldorff had to leave his position at Harvard University. He was forced to leave, and I mean, all of them were demonized. They all faced intense backlash from doing that. And you had the media at the time all jumping on the bandwagon of these people are going to kill the Great Barrington Declaration. It's like people are going to die. It's a dangerous theory. So they were all deemed, very dangerous to society, like almost like terrorists, really, for advocating not locking down and just protecting the elderly.
You mentioned PCR tests earlier, and I can't help but think it infuriates me. And we've had, Dr. Pierre Corey on many, many times. He's, to your point about ivermectin and other protocols, he wrote, the book, The War on Ivermectin. He says of obviously these shots would be pulled off the shelves immediately. That's also what Dr. Peter McCullough, a good friend of the show, has also said many, many times. And yet they're still there. And they're television commercials during, NFL games and so forth. And you see John Legend going to get his flu shot and also getting his COVID shot with his little Band-Aid on his shoulder. And Travis Kelce, and the promotions in the United States are still ongoing. And the same with, I imagine, the PCR tests. So I want to kind of go back to, you mentioned the PCR tests and how flawed they were. Like the rapid testing, are we still using those in order to determine whether or not you have COVID or something else right now? They're still being used?
Yeah, I mean, these were billion-dollar procurement scandals that I sort of exposed in my book. And I mean, it's nothing more than I see it as a big scam. It really is. And it's to perpetuate this idea of like, they used it, we know, to just prolong locking down. And
And the government bought them. The government was like, hey, the United States government, you could go to this website and have them shipped to your house. So the government was paying billions in this massive like money laundering scheme is what it really at the heart of it.
Exactly. So I talk a lot about that, and I highlight Innova Medical Group as one of the companies, and the umbrella group is Pesaka Capital, by an enigmatic Charles Huang who was from Wuhan, actually, Charles Huang. And so you have, it's, if you, again, going back to the timeline, because again, dates don't lie, right? It's when things happen, you can unravel a lot. And for some reason, Innova was the sort of first, the first horse to, like the first out of the box kind of thing. They were the ones who were buying. This is before even the pandemic was declared. They were founded just at that time, and they were going all in on these tests. And it
Huh.
happened to be the one that the UK government, through the NHS, this is our National Health Service, they only used Innova when there were lots of dozens others who were which were more, validated, that weren't as flawed. But they went with Innova Medical Group, from this California startup, buying these Chinese-made tests. And literally, we had the FDA. I mean, when I wrote that, that was based on an original report I wrote at the time in 2021. And it was actually at the time I started writing on Innova and these lateral flow tests before the FDA made their announcement that the US public need to throw them in the rubbish because they're so bad. And I'd already written part one of my report. So part two was based on, oh my goodness, so they're not even, but you have the UK government going all in and doubling down, and just billions and billions going. So these are called the VIP lanes. So it's, this is a huge scandal in the UK, these VIP lanes where certain companies got special treatment and got really good, hefty procurement contracts, all at the UK taxpayers' expense.
Yeah, one big boondoggle. It's curious how this company sort of just gets suddenly founded, pops up out of
Yeah.
nowhere,
Yeah.
secures these massive government contracts. It reminds me of what we're seeing right now with, like, on Polymarket, where these people are making millions of dollars betting on that the United States is about to attack Iran or whatever, and they have some sort of insider information about what's about to unfold. That, you could examine this and say that's why it's clear that this was all planned. I guess at the end of the day, are you willing to say, that this was planned?
I would say there's the evidence. What the evidence tells us is that this was a coordinated. This wasn't just a normal, response to a health event, crisis. It was this. There's too many things that are going on where it's like it's a coordinated effort for a global reset. And I believe my last chapter talks about the rise of global authoritarianism that we are seeing across the West. And I believe COVID was used as a pretext to bring in this sort of global, this sort of biosecurity state. You've got this expansion of digital IDs, which is very hot topic now, digital IDs. And that is in accordance with Agenda 20, this is the UN's Agenda 2030's Sustainable Development Goals 16.9, which mandates universal legal identity by 2030. And then you have the UK's, and then you've got entrenched in laws, you have the UK's Online Safety Act and the EU's Digital Services Act. So this is the landscape we are right in. We have all these laws put in under the guise for our safety, right? And it's all to do with justifying surveillance and control. Clayton, I believe at the core of this is control.
Yeah.
Is more and more control. And it's surveillance, and it's really frightening. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrifying. I want everyone to read the book, of course, but I'll just sort of get you out of here on this, Sonia, which is, do you think we've learned our lesson?
Well, this is another reason why I wrote the book, Clayton. I wanted to document this. I wanted to chronicle it. I wanted to do it for humanity, because I believe that knowledge and truth is the antidote for this, for the next global crisis, reset, whatever it is, or the next pandemic. If people know the truth, if they have the knowledge, then that is more powerful than, when you know the truth and you know what's going on, it doesn't make you afraid. It makes you really aware of what's going on, and
It's empowering.
and that's really, it's empowering, exactly. And really, that was the main aim of writing this book.
right? When we can see their roadmap, we can see their plan. When we have a document, now we have your book, which is really the perfect catalog of this event. And then we know their game plan. You know, it's like a coach. It's like a coach having the game plan of the other coach on the other team, going into the game, so that we don't fall for this again.
Yes.
To you know, they can try all they want. It's not going to work. I mean, you know, people are going to go into lockdowns again in this way. I mean, I'm sure there would be people, but I think we're great work by you and others here that have laid it all out. I don't think we're ever going to do that again, but they'll try in other ways. You know, of course they'll try it in other ways, and you know, we'll see if they're successful or not. But as they've mentioned, this was a trial run, right? I mean, it was so detrimental, and we've had people on the record saying this was really a trial run.
I see it as almost a stress test to see how much they could get away with, how much people could comply. It was a stress test.
They did a remarkable job. They got away with a lot. Unbelievable. Oh boy. The book is called 311. You've got to, everyone, please go check it out right now. Let me just put it back up here on the screen for everyone. 311, The Viral Takeover. I'm just going to read the subtitle because I love the subtitle. On March 11th, 2020, a pandemic was declared and our world was changed forever. Again, go buy the book, buy an extra copy, donate it to your library. This is their roadmap so that this never happens again. Sonia, great to see you. Thank you for the incredible work on this. 5 years in the making.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you inviting me on to interview me on this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.